Hello, and welcome to today's event, Disability Justice Resource and Mid-Atlantic Accessibility Resource Committee Process Share. I'm Mital Lyons-Warren, Manager of Arts U and Local Engagement with Americans for the Arts, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm a millennial white woman with curly brown hair, currently clipped up with the right side shaved down. I have on glasses, a turquoise sweater, and gold plant earrings. I am in my office with arts and plants behind me, and I'm standing on the ancestral and current lands of the Hatonkan and Acostans in Washington, D.C., which neighbors the ancestral and current lands of the Piscataway and Pamunkey peoples. We've got a great program planned today, and I'm really excited to get started. But first, some quick reminders. Please note that this presentation is being recorded, and this recording will be available in a few business days on the activity page. In addition to ASL interpretation, live captions are available for viewing. To turn it on or off, press the CC or closed caption button at the bottom of your screen, and then select Show or Hide Subtitle. Resources for today's activity will be posted under the Resources tab of today's event, which was just put in the chat. And if you need any assistance post this event, please email artsu@artsusa.org. There will be time for questions at the end of today's presentation, and you can submit those to the Q&A function. If you see a question in the Q&A that you would like to know the answer to, you may upvote that question by clicking the thumbs up button. Should you need any technical assistance today, please put them in the chat box, and I, Mital at AFTA, will be sure to follow up. And with that, I'm pleased to pass it to Sarah Lutis, Program Director of Performing Arts and Accessibility Coordinator, for an overview of the Mid-Atlantic Resource Committee and introductions of Francisco and Derek, two fabulous committee members who have joined us today. Sarah?
Thanks so much, Mital. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here with you today. My name is Sarah Lutis. I'm the Program Director, Performing Arts and Accessibility Coordinator at Mid-Atlantic Arts, which is one of 6 regional arts organizations. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm a white woman with short brown hair and a brown sweater with a blurred out background. I'm zooming in today from my home located on lands known as Baltimore, Maryland. I want to acknowledge the Piscataway and Susquehannock peoples as historic stewards of this land, and the enduring presence of Piscataway, Lumbee, and Eastern Band of Cherokee community members in Baltimore City today. And I'll pass to Heather for your introduction.
Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Flanagan, Leadership Alliances Manager at Americans for the Arts. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm joining today from Warrenton, Virginia, originally home to the Manahoac people. I identify as a light-skinned mixed woman with shoulder-length dark brown hair, and today I'm wearing a beige sweater with rose gold jewelry. I'm seated in my home office nook with a bookshelf to my left, a wedding photo and houseplants to my right, and a blue curtain behind me. I come to this work, and really all of my work, as a disability justice advocate and one half of a loving interabled marriage. Now back to Sarah for a review of today's agenda.
Thanks, Heather. The goals of today's webinar are to share the context behind the creation of the Mid-Atlantic Accessibility Resource Committee, to share upcoming accessibility and disability justice related resources developed out of the committee's work, and then to talk directly with committee members about their experience on the committee. Mid-Atlantic Arts and AFTA first planned to develop web-based accessibility resources in late 2019, pre-pandemic. The timeline of the development of these resources was shifted later due to the pandemic, but eventually resources were produced with NEA funding, which was originally allocated to support state arts agency staff traveling to build knowledge around accessibility and disability justice. Since traveling wasn't an option due to the pandemic, these digital resources were a good alternative to continue shared learning around access and disability justice. The curriculum for these first web resources were developed internally by staff at Mid-Atlantic Arts and AFTA. And I'll pass it back to Heather now to share about the resources that have already been generated through our partnership.
Thank you, Sarah. This is Heather speaking. So as you heard, in 2019, Mid-Atlantic Arts and Americans for the Arts started to learn together about accessibility as a key to successful inclusion in the arts and culture field. Hao-Wen Wang from Mid-Atlantic and Marissa Shadburn from Americans for the Arts spearheaded several webinars and coffee chats to educate on the importance of advocating for disability, the topic, being included, and people with disabilities having a seat at the proverbial table. Presenters shared tactics for gaining organizational buy-in and creating a cross-departmental plan for how arts administrators could better support individual artists in their communities. 4 of these sessions are available on demand on the Mid-Atlantic Accessibility Resource Committee Disability Justice Resource Package on ArtsU, which Mital just put the link in the chat. So you can still access those today. And they're also available on the activity page of this webinar. So along the way, the work transitioned from Hao-Wen and Marissa to the team you see here today with Sarah, Mital, and myself to implement the idea of creating a committee of disability justice experts who bring both professional wisdom and lived experience to determine the curriculum for this program. The group, which became the Mid-Atlantic Accessibility Resource Committee, has become an important step in our journey of actively sharing leadership with our partners. We look forward to sharing some of our learnings with you today, as well as resources in the coming months. Specifically, we're excited to share that in the spring, 3 resource sessions developed by the committee will be available on ArtsU. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks. This is Sarah speaking. The Mid-Atlantic Accessibility Resource Committee, or MARC, open call took place in spring of 2022. We received 26 applications from individuals across the Mid-Atlantic region. The MARC selection was made by AFTA and Mid-Atlantic Arts staff. Selection criteria included ensuring a wide range of experience within the field of disability justice and accessibility, as well as diversity of identity and geographic representation within the Mid-Atlantic region. 6 experts from the field of accessibility and disability justice were selected: Francisco Eco Areso, Kate Gorman, Devin Hill, Shelley Kuhn, Derek Quevedo, and Mark Roxy. Each of these committee members were compensated $500 with the expectation to attend 3 to 4 committee meetings with review and brainstorming work between meetings. The charge to the committee was to ensure that upcoming digital resources generated between Mid-Atlantic Arts and AFTA had a disability-centered approach, to lead suggestions of format for the resources, and to make suggestions for topics of focus, as well as suggest speakers for each resource. Informed directly by the committee's work, AFTA and Mid-Atlantic Arts will be producing resources on the following topics for winter-spring 2023: accountability, intersectionality, and budgeting for accessibility. Speakers for each topic are still being confirmed. The format will be a short 15 to 20-minute conversation between 2 experts on each respective topic. In the weeks following the release of those pre-recorded conversations, we will host an hour-long Zoom conversation moderated by the topical experts, where attendees can discuss the topic with one another, ask questions, brainstorm, learn, and connect with one another. AFTA and Mid-Atlantic Arts will be sharing these videos and the sign-ups for the follow-up conversations as they are developed, and I hope you'll consider checking them out. I'll close this overview by sharing that the first iteration of the MARC was absolutely a learning experience for myself at Mid-Atlantic Arts and for AFTA, and I want to sincerely thank all 6 of the MARC participants for their collaboration. I'm now really happy to bring on, they are here already, 2 of the committee members, Francisco and Derek, to introduce themselves. After that, I'm going to lead us through some questions for each of them, and then I'll turn it over to Heather to moderate the Q&A. If you have questions as you listen, you're welcome to submit them through the Q&A function anytime, as Mital mentioned. So with that, Francisco, can you get us started with an introduction?
Hi, everyone. I'm Francisco Eco Eraso, and my pronouns are he or él in Spanish. To give a quick self-description, I'm a white Latinx trans man with long dark hair and a short beard. I have blue eyes, and I'm wearing a white collared shirt and a golden shawl. I'm in my apartment with a white wall background and a weaving loom behind me. My access needs today are that I will be reading off of a script for some of my responses. No judgment around not making eye contact or looking kind of away, or making different facial expressions. I'll likely also move around and stim throughout this session. I'm currently based on the indigenous land of Lenape people, also known as Brooklyn, New York, home to one of the largest urban indigenous populations, including many Afro-diasporic and indigenous asylum seekers from around the world. I'm a trans-disabled Colombian American, interdisciplinary craft artist, curator, educator, arts administrator. I'm interested in grassroots approaches to disability justice, trans liberation, cooperative textiles, and the creative redistribution of resources. I hold a dual degree in critical visual studies and fine arts from Parsons The New School, who are currently on strike for a better contract for their part-time faculty. I'm a LEED certified access consultant, and I have worked with various arts organizations, including the Shed, Ford Foundation Gallery, Art and Disability Residency, and Kinetic Light. I presented on topics of access and disability artistry at Art in America, Virginia Commonwealth University, University of Illinois, Chicago, Columbia University, and other places too. I have previously worked as an administrator on the Disability Futures Fellowship Virtual Festival, manager of Textile Arts Center Artist in Residency Program, artistic director for a youth-based arts program for asylum seekers at an undisclosed sanctuary space, and an organizer at Third Root Community Health Center. I currently work as the Associate Manager of Access and Inclusion at the Whitney Museum of American Art, and I'm a proud member of the Whitney Union. I work on curatorial projects at Proclaiming Disability Arts, a disability art history project through NYU's Center for Disability Studies. And in my free time, I like to work on my textile art making practice. And I'll hand it over to Derek to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Francisco. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Derek Quevedo. My pronouns are he, him, y susha. I am a brown Asian man with glasses and a beard, black hat, jacket, and blue t-shirt. In my bedroom, which is adorned with various tapestries and cat furniture. I'm a Filipino American, disabled, mad, and neurodivergent visual artist and writer, currently settled on Piscataway and Susquehanna land, so-called Baltimore, Maryland. My drawing, painting, and writing practice are based on observations of everyday life, which for me is inseparable from concerns of identity, communities, liberation, and social justice. I also work as the office secretary at the Maryland State Arts Council, and I'm a member of our accessibility team. Previous to joining the resource committee, I collaborated with several folks here for a panel event for the LEAD conference just this past August, where I was a panelist for a discussion on invisible and non-apparent disability, both as a practicing artist and working in arts administration and in the state arts agency. That is pretty much it for my introduction.
Thank you both. Derek, can we stay with you and hear about how you found out about the Mid-Atlantic Accessibility Resource Committees and what interested you in the committee, what made you decide to submit?
Eric speaking again. Yeah, I think we had both talked about how it was you that introduced me to the opportunity for working on the Mid-Atlantic Accessibility Resource Committee. It was us that collaborated over the summer on getting that panel event ready for the LEAD conference. And I just figured this was just an opportune moment to both work within arts administration, which I had been doing here, being on MSAC for around 3 years now, and getting much more involved in accessibility and disability justice specific to the arts and art institutions. So I thought this was, why not just apply? And if I get to participate, then all the more for it.
Thank you. And this is Sarah speaking. Francisco, same question for you. How did you find out about this opportunity and what made you interested in engaging?
This is Francisco speaking. I found out about this from my employer, and I'll call her my friend, Simi Linton, who is a disability rights activist, writer, and access consultant. She encouraged me to apply for this resource committee after I worked to establish disability justice kind of conversations and working group for her current project, Proclaiming Disability Arts, along with my colleague, Allison Kopit. And I was just very curious about what other people might be thinking about in terms of disability justice and accessibility. There are a lot of complicated conversations that come up when working on big projects or working in larger organizations. Even from the perspective of a project like that is really steeped and centered in disability culture, there's always so much more to explore and talk about. So I was curious to connect with other people that might be facing similar concerns.
Great. Thank you both for that context. This is Sarah speaking. Really getting into some questions that I've prepped for you both about the experience on the committee. In our first meeting, we talked about whether to focus on Access 101 versus getting into more complex issues around accessibility and disability justice, knowing that the target audience for these web resources would be staff at state arts agencies in the Mid-Atlantic region, but that the resources would be available more broadly to anyone interested in engaging with them in the region and beyond. So as a committee, we opted not to create Access 101 materials after discussion. And can you all share your thoughts on the arc of that discussion and share some resources that you'd recommend for folks early in their learning around accessibility and disability justice? And Francisco, can I ask to start with you for this?
Yes, thank you, Sarah. This is Francisco speaking. In my experience working with other disabled artists and access workers, I think there's a general consensus that the foundation work for Access 101 has really been done a lot over and over. And I don't personally think we needed to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. And so I personally love to reference this esteemed contemporary artist, Carolyn Lazard, Lazard, free public resource titled Accessibility in the Arts, A Promise and a Practice, which was commissioned by Recess in 2019. This has really some great recommendations on how to address pretty standard, maybe 101 style accessibility in an arts organization context. As well as another resource that comes to mind first is Sins Invalid, Disability Justice Performance Collective and organization has a public free blog post titled Access Suggestions for a Public Event, and that was published in 2017. I think those are really great places to start. Looking into Carolyn Lazard's work, looking more into Sins Invalid's work in general will also be really helpful. Of course, access is always ever shifting. So it's been a while since 2017, 2019, a lot has happened. We're in a pandemic. And I also believe access should be based in and rooted in your community's specific needs, the specifics of a particular place and a cultural context. So it is to say, like, access isn't a one size fits all. But if you don't know where to start, those are some great places.
This is Sarah speaking. That's great, Francisco. I know Sins Invalid has been instrumental for me in understanding the work. Derek, anything else that you'd like to recommend or comments on the arc of that discussion around, how to shape the curriculum here?
Thanks, Sarah. This is Derek speaking. Yeah, I know that very early on in our discussions, we did not want to create what we consider just a checklist education. We didn't want to establish, a bare minimum of accessibility training and commitment with organizations, which is kind of what these types of checklist educations would entitle, of saying, I did this and I did this, so I guess I'm good to go. We really wanted to push forth the understanding that ableism is an ongoing and ever evolving oppression, and the language and strategies of disability justice are going to adapt and evolve in response to that. And ABEI work similarly needs to continue listening to that adaptation of evolution of our respective disability communities. So I know I said I really disliked, because of these reasons, the idea of like a glossary. And as I always say, like, the emphasis on listening to disabled folks, on amplifying and prioritize lived experience, and listening to respective communities and liberation movements, because one strategy will soon become obsolete and antiquated in a moment's notice, dependent on the path of ableism and the oppression and marginalization of the disability community, disabled folks, and just, more inaccessibility within institutions.
Absolutely. Thank you both for that context. This is Sarah speaking. I'll move us into the second question, which is around format for these web resources. In our second meeting together, we talked a lot about format. The original proposal from AFTA and Mid-Atlantic Arts was to create 3 hour-long webinars, fairly standard, and that's the model that the past web resources generated between Mid-Atlantic Arts and AFTA have followed. I do really recommend those resources, and that format can be, fruitful. It can serve a purpose, but we ended up going in a different direction for these resources. And can you all talk about why and how we dug into that format question, and any other reflections on format? And Derek, can I ask you to go first for this one?
Thanks. This is Derek speaking. Yeah, it was the suggestion of one of us that, it was a lot more accessible and an easier way for a lot of other folks on how we process information for kind of like these shorter formats. Um, Things like the commitment towards time and the resources to receive those aren't always accessible. So, we figured that this made it a lot more effective and accessible as far as receiving the information and especially processing this information. Um, yeah. I know personally, as an autistic, I can tend to hyper focus on things. So the reduction of information and materials and, less commitment towards these kind of like time restraints so that I have the ability to concentrate on such processings of like information is like a really helpful and beneficiary presentation format.
Thanks, Derek. This is Francisco, or excuse me, this is Sarah speaking. And for those who are listening in, I do want to highlight that the direction we went in from a 60-minute webinar is a shorter 15 to 20-minute pre-recorded session that folks could watch on their own time. And so now, Francisco, if I can pass it to you to speak any more about the format.
Yeah, thank you. This is Francisco speaking. Like Derek said, I believe another member of the MAARC named Shelly Kuhn actually suggested that shorter format based on some work that they had done in the past, so that, like you said, the videos wouldn't be so long and maybe hard to commit to. We want the format of these offerings to be just as accessible as the content that we're hoping to disseminate. I know for myself, I'll be more inclined to watch a shorter video than commit to an hour long or more recording. Sometimes joining a live Zoom event, it's easier to spend more time, but even then, I work mostly remotely, so I experience a lot of Zoom fatigue. I love that this shorter format can offer more possibilities in a budget perspective as well of who we can learn with. I'm really excited on who will be a part of the upcoming series. And I have to say, on that point of budgeting, I'm really a big fan of paying workers proper weight or wage, especially, working with people who are financially disenfranchised, like from the disability community. I've worked at large foundations, I've worked at small grassroots organizations. And in any case, I think as long as there's a commitment to really having a conversation about our collective access, committing to really treat each other and pay each other generously and caring and considering for each other, that anything is possible regardless of a budget size. So I think that this is kind of like accessible not only for our viewers, but also for us in the process, and hopefully for like an accessible budget plan as well.
Thanks, Francisco. This is Sarah speaking. Yes, I want to also highlight that, we shared the budget that we had available internally with the committee and did get some feedback that these rates a little low, and so that's something that as we go into future planning for this work, if we do want to expand into longer format type resource development, that we need as institutions to look at that. And I do appreciate the kind of generous framing there, Francisco, of a kind of accessible budget by having the program itself be shorter. Is there anything else either of you would like to speak to in terms of format before we shift to the next question?
This is Derek speaking. Nothing further from me for the moment.
Okay, this is Sarah. Hearing none, I'll jump into the last prepared question that I have for you both, which is that we had 4 90-minute meetings for the Mid-Atlantic Accessibility Resource Committee, with additional work completed by each of you in between, which included brainstorming suggestions for future discussion, thinking through your networks, reviewing materials that we had generated, a variety of things. In the meetings and in the one-on-one feedback that I had with some of you following our fourth meeting, we talked about how such a relatively restrictive time structure can be challenging and how this relates back to capitalism. The way we work within institutions is so often product driven, like the production of these web resources. And can you all talk about the relationship between capitalism and disability justice work in general, and as it relates to the committee experience? And Francisco, can we start with you?
Yes, thank you. This is Francisco speaking. So I think I find it hard to really believe that disability justice can happen or, thrive when connected to any capitalist system or organization. It's so important to learn about and to really get with the movement. But I have read countless articles, blog posts, which is our accessible format for communicating, and engage with so many conversations with colleagues, elders in the movement, and other access workers and disabled artists alike, who all agree and continue to talk about how disability justice has been extracted from its context and co-opted into sometimes even very harmful capitalist systems and organizations. So to say there is a lot of pushback from our communities about co-optation. I think that's probably true with a lot of justice-based movements, not just disability justice. But like I said, I think it is extremely important to learn about and to apply to your life and work as much as is appropriate. I just want to caution about co-opting work of Black, Brown, Indigenous, Asian, trans, queer, and disabled justice-based organizers who have been committed to dismantling systems of ableism and oppression that impact our communities, just so that maybe an organization can sound welcoming to disabled audiences. That's not really what this work is about. I will say that most general, kind of as a flip side, or maybe the other end of this this conversation, general accessibility work oftentimes, when just left as that, can lean white or might not consider culturally specific access needs of disabled people of color or queer and trans disabled communities. So I think that for me seems to be why so many organizations are pushing towards incorporating disability justice language as opposed to just saying accessibility, quote unquote, because disability justice has at bare minimum this kind of assumption that we're including and hopefully prioritizing disabled people of color. But I do think there's so much to talk about with this topic. So I'll pass it off to you, Derek, and maybe I might respond after you talk too, if there's time. Because it's very interesting. Yeah.
Thanks, Francisco. Yeah, this really does open up like a huge can of worms here. Like the elephant in the room for all types, especially for ADEI work, is that, yeah, capitalism is the villain. And concerning disability justice and ableism, capitalism relies on our productivity, and it conditions us by, making an example of those who are disabled. It others and oppresses us and saying that this is the consequence of failure to perform. And, therein lies the examples of our marginalization. So, many of us within disability justice work, we are disabled and we utilize a lot of practices that are antithetical to the standardization of non-disabled performance. We utilize spoon theory, we run on crib time, we practice snail solidarity with ourselves and each other, we allow rest, we dismantle hierarchical work if we can and say that this is what we are all doing together in mutualism and community. We love practicing this radical notion that we all have value, whether or not we are productive, which is not something capitalism espouses, especially when it encourages terms such as whether or not we are contributing members of society. So, one of the very popular phrases, especially in our liberation work, is nothing about us without us. So I think that especially working within systems of institution makes me tall. Working within systems of institution, the standards and what we consider like the status quo or the norms of production or progress or the workload in general has to be redefined and reestablished, especially on our terms. And, we definitely practice that while we were in our sessions. We allowed what are our access needs? Where are we right now? I know we have a structure and a time frame, but that needs to change. And there's no way around that.
Thanks, Derek and Francisco. This is Sarah speaking. We do have time for continued, reflection on this topic. I know it's huge, and I didn't mean to stick us with a gigantic thing to dig into, but I wanted to make sure we brought it forward in a public forum. And since we were able to have this conversation, it felt essential, that we raise this since it was part of what we discussed. So I welcome you all's additional comments if you have any. I also want to lift up what Mital shared in the chat, that if you are watching right now and you have questions for Francisco and Derek, go ahead and put them in the Q&A and we'll get to them in a moment.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Derek. This is Francisco speaking. I'm getting emotional, which I often get emotional when you speak, Derek. It hits right on the nail all too often. And I'm so grateful to be in community with you and with others through this, the AARC. I think that's been my favorite part of the process. And I think to try not to cry on screen while I'm being recorded publicly, I'm actually going to pivot and post something in the chat that I didn't expect to. It's also another blog post from Sins Invalid. And it's the 10 principles of disability justice. So again, perhaps you're new to this work. Maybe you haven't seen this before. I'm actually going to read out these 10 principles so that you know why maybe we're saying this. Not all of this will be compatible with an organization that you're working with, but maybe you should keep trying to follow disability justice or to do some of these things. But claiming that an organization is doing disability justice often isn't true. So a little bit of context, right? The 10 Principles of Disability Justice blog post by Sins Invalid that is often cited, released in September 17th of 2015, names 1, intersectionality, 2, leadership of the most impacted, 3, anti-capitalist politic. That's a hard one for organizations, right? 4, commitment to cross-movement organizing. 5, recognizing wholeness. People have inherent worth outside of commodity relations and capitalist notions of productivity. That is what really hits the nail for me, Derek. I think I'm on 7, or maybe 6, sustainability, pacing ourselves. The next one is commitment to cross-disability solidarity, which really means collective access, right? The next one is interdependence. We meet each other's needs in order to build towards liberation. And one of the next ones actually cites collective access. As brown, Black, and queer-bodied disabled people, we bring flexibility and creative nuance that go beyond able-bodied or minded normativity to be in community with each other. That's a priority, right? And the last one cites collective liberation. No body or mind can be left behind. Only moving together can we accomplish the revolution we require. So just to said a little bit of actual disability justice 101 that we said we wouldn't do, but citing something that's already out there, to give a little bit of context for these comments.
This is Sarah speaking. Thank you, Francisco, for sharing those 10 principles of disability justice from Sins Invalid with the group. I think that's so great, and potentially a good way to transition into our Q&A. But before we do that, I want to ask Francisco and Derek, is there anything else that you'd like to share more broadly about the committee experience or the resources being developed before we move into this Q&A space?
This is Derek speaking. I just wanted to take the moment to also thank Francisco for sharing space with me on the committee and for really being able to partake in it and, vibe off of each other's thoughts, ideas, opinions. I wish Mark was here too today. He unfortunately could not make it, but like if everyone else had also been here today, like just to show acknowledgement and appreciation for our shared space and time together.
Thank you, Derek. This is Sarah speaking. Yes, I definitely want to lift up all 6 of the committee participants. And thank you to Derek and Francisco for being here today to share out a bit more about the committee experience and the work and the conversations that came out of that work. And so with that, Heather, can I bring you in to lead our Q&A section of this moment?
Absolutely. Thank you. This is Heather speaking. Hi, everyone, again. Thank you so far for the incredible sharing of learnings and information about the MARC. And so Mital put also in the chat that if you would prefer to speak your question out loud, we can have you raise your virtual hand and transition that way. But so far in the Q&A, just wanted to lift up, there was a question about the Sins Invalid blog post, which will be added to the resources page for this webinar, as well as it being in the chat right now. And then we do have a question for our panelists here. First, expressing gratitude for this conversation today. And the question is, based on your experience on this committee, what advice would you share with others who are interested in starting a committee like this? And Derek, do you want to maybe give some thoughts on this first?
Thanks, Heather. Derek speaking. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Amplify disabled voices. Our amplification, our involvement, our centering is the priority, especially on things like organizations, collectives, collaboratives. Lived experience is often, especially thinking of institutions, e-centered or not prioritized, and saviorism, especially within this work on our level, it can be problematic very quickly. So just the idea of, yeah, like I said, nothing about us without us.
Thank you. And I'm sure tokenism want to avoid that as well. But still bringing in diverse lived experiences and professional experiences, which I think our 6 MARC committee members, I wish, like you said, I wish they were all here today because everyone really brought their full selves to the group each time. So Francisco, do you want to add anything here?
Yes, thank you. This is Francisco speaking. I would echo what Derek has said, and I would also say, depending on what organization you're working with, I and the scale and where you're located and the kind of work that you do. I would also try to do outreach to organizations that are either local in your area or that you're already somehow connected with, or you know, communities that you'd like to bring in more. Let's say that you have a budget already for ASL interpretation. Are you connected with your local deaf communities or with other deaf organizations? You know, that would be great, since you have the budget to have ASL for all of your programming, for example. So really try to be as specific as you can and considerate about the communities that are kind of already there. And another kind of separate note is patience, right? Just an openness to learning. A lot of the access conversations that already exist, like we've said before, are very checklist. So they encompass, like I said, things like ASL interpretation, captions, visual descriptions, but access could mean so many things to different people. And the only way that you're going to learn what works best for who might be on your committee or who you might be working with is by listening to them, perhaps asking people, and maybe going along with things that are unsaid, right? What if someone has their camera off on a Zoom meeting? Are they still participating? Probably. That's probably just how they participate. Is someone not really speaking or engaging much or socializing with others? That's okay too. Everyone should be given equal opportunity regardless of what their access needs are or how they engage. So I think just having patience along the way as we're all learning together, honestly, is really going to be helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So our next question is a bit long because there is context, but I want to honor this person's contribution. So thank you, Alan. I'm going to read the whole thing, so bear with me here. Alan says, I consider that 1, everyone has some sort of disability. 2, not all disabilities are apparent or visible. 3, that some apparent disabilities are not necessarily disabling. And 4, that everyone with an apparent or self-perceived disability has powerful abilities. Alan says he comes to this conclusion as a musician and composer of 40+ years of professional experience who lost a leg in a motorcycle accident as a young adult a few years before becoming a working musician. It says, I decided I had a slight mobility challenge, but it was not disabling. I'm a high above the knee amputee who is not adapted to prosthesis. So every time I walk on the stage, my crutches and my missing leg are obvious. I have never exploited my, in quotes, disability, but I'm wondering how I can contribute more to people who feel disabled and have difficulty overcoming this self-perception, not by combating ableism, but by demonstrating ability. I'm not sure how to go about it. So let me know if either of you want me to backtrack a little bit to echo the question here. But I think this goes along with digging deep into just digging deep. Francisco, do you want to take this first?
Sure. This is Francisco speaking. And Alan, I want to acknowledge that there's a lot of moving parts for this question. So I'm not going to be able to answer every part. But I think the way that I'm going to answer it is by saying that perhaps representation matters, right? To say it doesn't really, for me, in my work as a curator and as working with other people who have all kinds of different disability experiences and who are also non-disabled artists as well. I think representation really matters. And so this makes me think of, your question makes me think of a project done by a colleague of mine named Miyuki Tanaka. And I don't know the specifics of the project. I wish I could link out to it right now. But on this topic of how people who have amputee experiences actually may have different relationships to disability, identity, and maybe have different relationships to what you're saying as ability, right? As just a difference in how we move around the world. And part of her project was really amplifying representation of people who have amputated limbs and who were athletes. And so I think that that project really stands out to me. That's kind of maybe going to be my response there, that really just amplified representation of those people in that community in Japan specifically. And I think that's also one way to support other disabled people in one way or another is through representation. It's not the end all be all solution to ableism or many of our social issues, but I think that representation does matter. Yeah.
Thank you. And if you find that resource, we can always share that after our webinar today. That would be wonderful. Derek?
Thanks, Heather. This is Derek speaking. Yeah, thanks again for sharing your experience and having that vulnerability and opening up with us. Really appreciative. And also, yeah, the acknowledgement that, you know, disability and the identity of disabled is not a monolith. You know, yeah, there are many different forms of disability, individual and systemic, medical and social models included. So yeah, we all have valid lived experience with that, including those with similar conditions as our own. I am also type 2 diabetic, and I know that many within the community do not define themselves as with disabilities or disabled, even though many of the same exact experience that they're saying aren't valid as disabled are definitely validated by me. So yeah, that's important to acknowledge also these levels, right? That are, you know, everyone has, should have the ability and accessibility of sharing it with each other and others that want to learn from us. So we have our identities as disabled, but we have also have our communities, you know, with our identities of the disability community. And we also have our liberation movements involved with that, right? So there are all these levels to it. And I think, yeah, as far as supporting each other, that those bonds of community are just very important. Those connections that we have, there are times very early in the disability justice movement where all we had were each other, you know? So I think that's also very, very important. And I think supporting those folks with your experience or similar experiences involves, yeah, just having dialogue and discussions with them is a very important one that we should never neglect or forget.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you so much, both of you, for your responses and for the question. I don't see any further questions in our Q&A. So I think with that and our last 5 minutes here, I'm going to pass it back to Mital to close us out. But thank you again from me and my perspective of the Mid-Atlantic Accessibility Resource Committee. Mital?
Thank you, Heather. This is Mital. A big thank you to Francisco and Derek and everyone on the Mid-Atlantic Accessibility Resource Committee, Mark. And thank you to all who've attended. I know it's a Friday evening, afternoon, so we really appreciate you being here to hear about our disability justice resources and the MARC process share. Be on the lookout for upcoming expert video resources and live conversations that were crafted by the committee in early 2023. You can register for the whole package of past and future resources on ArtsU, and I just put that in the chat. As a reminder, this event was recorded and will be available for replay in a few business days and for you to share. And be sure to visit us at artsu.americansforthearts.org for other training opportunities and resources. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you, everyone.